Fans of the Horus Heresy, Warhammer 40,000, Gunpla, or whatever may bring you to channel Leakycheese, thank you very much for joining me for the third part of my 2000 subscriber giveaway Q&A. So this follows on from the first two parts. There are links in the description to those if you'd like to check them out. And in this video I'm going to continue answering questions that were left on the 2000 subscriber giveaway video. So I'm going to answer questions for about 15 minutes. So I'm just going to pick up where I left off last time round. I'd just like to start by thanking each and every one of you who left a comment, observation, question or funny remark or joke on the subscriber giveaway video. Just like to thank you all very much for those. I really appreciate those and enjoyed reading them. The first question is from Kenji Yu, I think. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. And the question is, hope you get more subs, thank you very much. What is your theory on Horus repenting right before his death and playing a role in future 40k stories? Gosh, thinking back to the first writing of the story of the fight between the Emperor and Horus, and it hasn't changed that much. Basically, the moment when the Emperor finally realised that Horus was completely lost and saw him for what he had become, an abomination and a puppet of the Chaos Gods, he decided to utterly destroy Horus, not just in the physical sense, but completely annihilate his very existence as a, well, his very presence in the warp, you may say, or the imprint of his soul, if you choose to use those terms. And that was very much how the story described what the Emperor did to him. He annihilated Horus's very existence and being, so there was nothing left of him. As to the repenting part, well, yes, it was noted that for a moment, as the Emperor turned his full might against Horus, his full psychic might, the Chaos Gods withdrew. They knew they were beaten. And in that moment, Horus had a moment of terrified realization when his sanity returned. And the Emperor saw this as well. But then the Emperor nonetheless destroyed him because he couldn't ever allow Horus to be a puppet of the Chaos Gods again, which was a high risk given his recent history. Yes, I think there is a good argument for him repenting, and I guess there is a theme of tragic forgiveness in that story, isn't it? That despite the fact that the Emperor could see that Horus was truly sorry and regretful for what he had done and what he had allowed to happen in the Horus Heresy, he still had to be destroyed. Now, as to whether or not there could be anything left of Horus in the future is largely a question of speculation and essentially rewriting lore to allow some fragment of Horus to have survived. Given that so much has been written about how Horus was attempted to be cloned, and obviously the involvement of the Chaos Powers with the traitor marines who cloned him, there doesn't seem to be any real base in what's been written so far for anything to remain of Horus as himself, as opposed to a simulacra of him. So I find it difficult to imagine that Horus could come back as himself. It's perhaps a different line. Another clone of Horus is created, perhaps by Fabius Bile, and it is somehow imbued with more power and effectiveness than the previous clones had been, and somehow became a figurehead for the Chaos Legions again. That could work. Or perhaps, here's a third idea, perhaps if something happened to change the state of the Emperor, then maybe that could trigger something, reappearance of Horus. So a change occurs in the Emperor in the warp. Maybe there's a balance to that elsewhere in the warp with allowing Horus to reappear. I don't know, that's an interesting thought as well. Anyway, thank you for that fascinating question. Neil Kirkley asks, from what I've seen, it looks like the index for the Marines has all the codex stuff, then other chapter stuff separate. For instance, the Blood Angels don't appear to have any troop options and so on. Do you think that they will be able to take things like Devastator Centurions or similar? I guess, unfortunately, I'm a bit late in answering this question. The answer is yes. From the index perspective, then there are kind of like a set of non-generic troop options for your Space Marines, so Centurions, Devastator squads, tactical squads, etc., Primaris squads, and then you've got chapter-specific stuff in a separate list. I don't believe any Space Marine force has got any exclusions around those troop options. Going with a specific chapter just gives you more options as far as I can tell. Obviously the Space Wolves are going to be weird and wacky as usual. It's going to be interesting to see how the codex for the Space Marines is going to change this, and clearly their codex will be out first, and from what we've heard on the Warhammer community recently, that might not be too far away. I hope that answers your question. The next question comes from Christopher McCurry, who subscribed around 900-ish. Can you discuss the merits of buying and assembling your army before painting versus paint as you go? I believe we've seen the approach you favour, but why and what are the pros and cons? So with the 3 large heresy armies I've built, which is the Iron Hands Legion, the Mechanicum and the Solar Auxilia, I've bought and assembled all the models, and then I'm going to do all the painting in sequence. So let's do the pros first. So from the modelling point of view, you can get everything consistent by doing it in one lot, I feel. And when you're building 60 Solar Auxilia las rifle troops, you really get your eye in on what you're building and learn the tricks of putting those models together, and you get to apply those as you go, and it's all very fresh in your memory as you work through. So that's a definite advantage. It also gives you the option of changing your mind perhaps as you build your army. I've certainly bought things for all of my forces that I've changed my mind about later and sold, and if I'd painted those up, then I'd have been sorry to have sold them. I guess I'd probably got more money for them, but then I'd have felt I'd maybe wasted some time doing those. So the ability to fully build your army, get happy with gaming it from my point of view, because gaming and collecting, before you then paint it, that is an advantage. And then when it comes to the actual painting, there's an obvious benefit for painting consistency. If you do a big batch of miniatures all together, again, you get your eye in, you get consistent, you don't forget any colour mixes you do, because when I paint, I mix a lot of colours. I'm very much from a generation, if I want like a pale green camo, well, I'll take some mid-green, I might take some off-white and mix my own colours. I do a lot of my own colour mixing, so that means I have paint pots full of mixed colours, and if I do one batch at the same time, it's easier for me to remember the proportions of paint and the paints I use when I do that. And if I need more paint, well, clearly it's still probably going to be on sale. Whereas if a couple of years down the line I want to add to that collection and that a paint has gone off the market, then I've got to try find a substitute to match the colour. So that's an advantage as well. Disadvantages, well, distraction. Going off topic, I mean, as I've done, I started with my Mechanicum, went on a diversion with the Solar Auxilia, and then went on another diversion with the Iron Hands, which have been big. That ability to get distracted with your projects and not focus on finishing anything. Although from a building point of view, they are finished. The next con is obviously getting the money together to complete your full force. When you're talking with Forge World models, that's a lot of cash. And I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have the money to do that, but I can imagine that some people don't, so you might have to adjust your expectations as to how you build your force. If you can't do a big upfront lump sum cash investment in effect, you've got to paint as you go, or it's just going to take you an awful long time to get there. I guess that's a con as well. And the third con, and this is probably an obvious con which many people understand, is the scale of painting tasks that you set yourself. And I mean, I've got no illusions that I've got a lot of painting to do when I start. That's going to be a challenge, and I can do it. I mean, I've done the building, and I've probably spent as long building as I'm going to spend painting. So if I can do the building, I can do the painting in terms of time, but it's going to take a long time to do, just like the building did though. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Benjamin Sansan, who subscribed at the 500 sub video, asks, is there anything in 30k that you would love to see rules for in the 40k game? Would you like to see Xenos added to 30k? If yes, which ones? Could even be a new one made extinct due to the Horus Heresy? I love this question. Thank you very much, Benjamin. This is a great one. I've got lots to say about this. Right, is there anything in 30k I'd like to see rules for in the 40k game? Yes, Battle Automata, the Mechanicum. And we're going to get this in the form of the upcoming Imperial Armour book called The Fires of Syraxus from Forge World. And that's going to be 8th edition rules for Battle Automata in 40k, and they're going to obviously be back portable, in my view, into 30k for those of you who like to try that. So definitely those units. I'd also like to see 40k rules for all the custodian grav vehicles for 40k as well. I think that would be a nice port. They'll have to be, I think they'll need to be done as limited options, so you can't like have massive forces of them, because they're supposed to be rare. I think that would be a nice thing to do as well. And then on the question of Xenos in 30k, right, well, I've got a couple here. If you read the Horus Heresy books in depth, there's all sorts of lovely little Easter eggs about weird and wonderful alien races that the Marine Legions encounter. I've picked a couple of favourites out. So the first is a creature called the Carnoplasm, and the carnoplasm was a being that dissolved most of the biological material of the Mechanicum arch Magos in our Sartorial. I don't know quite what a carnoplasm looks like, but I imagine it kind of like vomits its guts up over stuff. Maybe sort of like it's a blob or something that absorbs biological matter. So I'd like to see a model of a carnoplasm. I'd also like to see just like loads of alien critters, and I'm going to do some videos about critters. I've got a plan in my mind about doing critter videos, and I've got actually quite a lot of critters to showcase as well, because there's kind of like a whole bit of a heresy where they're kind of crusading, exploring out and meeting all these weird and wonderful beasties, some of which are hostile to the legions and they have fights with them. So I think it's a great idea. But in terms of a specific kind of like force playable race, the race I would like to see are known as the Osiran Cybrids, and that's spelled P-S-Y-B-R-I-D-S. Now, for those of you who don't recognise the Osiran Cybrids, they're featured in Book 5 under the Ultramarines section, and it is in their exemplary battle. The Osiran Cybrids are strange mind-slaver creatures who create an army of subservient orcs and other creatures to fight for them, and they're these kind of strange, wispy, ethereal gas creatures that have sort of exoskeletal suits that they normally occupy when they're outside of their home habitat. Got Book 5, read the exemplary battle for these Ultramarines. It's great, and the Osiran Cybrids are a weird and wonderful race of creatures. They'll make a cool addition to the game. There you go, Benjamin. I hope you like that. The next question comes from Paul, who subscribed when I did my Forge World fault analysis, which was around 300 subs. And Paul says, I want to look at getting an airbrush. Do you have any recommendations for kit? I've recently bought a new airbrush, which is Iwata Neo. I bought it because I've read a lot of good things about it, and I actually saw one of the Forge World studio artists using it at one of the open days I went to a couple of years back. And I asked him about it, what were the capabilities like, and he said it was a really good brush. I think they cost about £65 to £70 if I remember rightly. Obviously if you shop around you might get them a bit cheaper. And the good thing is it's a dual action gravity feed airbrush. It comes with a cup, and then you can just use a hopper feed as well. It comes from a very well respected brand, Iwata, and it's got some of the really useful functions, i.e. gravity feed and dual action, that allow you to get the most out of the technique of airbrushing. I hope that answers your question, Paul. The next question is from Dave Carlton, who subscribed all the way back about 100 subs. And Dave asks, what is the best way to manipulate resin? So, I did a video talking about this. I've done a couple of videos talking about this. And just about all the time, I use boiling hot water or freshly boiled water, because obviously you can't use boiling water to manipulate resin, not safely anyway. I favour using freshly boiled hot water. For small parts, I'll just put it in a mug. For larger parts, I'll use some baking tray or ceramic tray. The reason I like using hot water to manipulate parts is it allows me to heat up specific parts of the model in a targeted fashion. The other obvious way of heating resin up to manipulate it is to use a hairdryer. I mean, there's two issues with using a hairdryer. The first is consistency of heat. So if you put something in a bath of hot water, it will heat up consistently and become malleable in a consistent manner. If you use a hairdryer, you're constantly having to work your hot air supply across the part to try and maintain the heating equally. And if you're doing any detail parts as well, I do some quite complex manipulations with my resin parts, and I simply, if I used a hairdryer, I'd heat my model up and I might lose some work I've already done when it unbends itself. Whereas when I do it with hot water, I can do each specific bit in turn to get my final effect. Using a heat gun source, so normally a hairdryer, that's quite sufficient. It can be useful if you find you've built a model and there's something that you need to manipulate. If you need to do that, and you can basically make a mask, like a card disc or plate, and cut out a small hole in it for the area you want to heat, and use it to mask off most of the model from the heat of the hairdryer and hold it against the model. Heat up the specific area you need to manipulate. It can be useful in that regard as well, because you might get to a point where you don't want to put the whole model into hot water for some reason. It might be an area that isn't accessible, and I did this, and if you watch my review on the Liberator tank from Beyond the Gates of Antares, you'll hear me talk about an example of this. So most of the time, hot water, special cases for me, hairdryer. That's a personal preference, and I've heard plenty of people who are skilled modelers do it either way. I guess the thing is to listen to a couple of different views on how to do it with a hairdryer, how to do it with hot water, then try it out for yourself and see which works for you. That's probably the best way to do it. Anyway, thanks for the question, Dave. And then the final question comes from Magos, who subscribed around the time of the What Made 40k June video. And Magos is also a YouTuber. He's got a channel with some really good 40k content and some quite tongue-in-cheek 40k content as well. You must watch his video, The Horus Heresy. I'll leave a link to one of his videos, review of the Rising Storm models, which is really well written and really looks and gets into the style and the art of the models really well. So yeah, please do check his channel out. So I've been subscribed to his channel for a while and I do like watching his videos. Yes, so I guess just to say to Magos, yes, I very much appreciated what you said about the videos I've done. It was very interesting to hear your observations on what I've done, and particularly the What Made 40k series. So thank you very much for that. I do appreciate what you said. And it is interesting to read that and think about what I do on the channel, because the What Made 40k videos have been very popular. It's not kind of like my core thing. However, it was an idea that struck me and I was like, oh yeah, this is good, I really want to give this a go. But they do take a long time to make, and I'm sure, Magos, you appreciate this because you've done some videos of a similar ilk that require a lot of research and writing to produce. Doing content like that certainly does propose a dilemma to creators like us in terms of the amount of time we have to invest in writing them to the amount of view time that they get and the attraction and the interest they generate for our channel. But very interesting to hear your thoughts on that. So that brings me to the end of the questions of this third section of the 2000 subscriber giveaway Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed listening to those. I've certainly enjoyed answering them. Please do join me again soon for the fourth part. I think we're probably going to get 6 parts out of this. There's loads of questions, or perhaps I just keep talking too much. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.